Jewish Meditation Series, Lesson 9, Strange Fire, Part 1 of 2. One of the most difficult and subtle challenges of a spiritual path is the matter of strange fire, which we'll define as taking pleasure from something that violates one's own moral code. The head says, no, this is wrong, but the heart's more primitive instincts respond to the stimulus and enjoy it. Strange fire often refers to illicit sexual arousal, but it also includes other things, like taking pleasure from someone else's shame, or enjoying the ego inflation evoked by flattery, etc. It might seem like plain old hypocrisy, which it technically is, yet the split between head and heart is also a built-in feature of humankind. Only tzaddikim do not struggle with these things. Yet, says the Talmud, there are at most 18,000 of them alive at any given moment, which amounts to, literally, 2 in a million. And really, says the Tanya, Hashem makes tzaddikim. To be free of wayward impulses is a gift and a grace. The rest of us struggle with incongruence. We strive to live by our ideals. We try and fail, get back on the horse and try again. Integrity is an elusive goal, but with commitment, we inch our way toward it. The consciousness of strange fire and desire to avoid it brings one into conflict with the thrust of Western society, whose economy revolves around finding new and improved ways to awaken strange fire. That's what sells cars and food and clothes and music, etc. Much of the world actually pursues strange fire. It's a rare few that strive to avoid it. Confronting the challenge of strange fire is a truly heroic effort. Generally, one starts with a strategy of avoidance. Don't look at things that trigger the passions you're trying to quell. That's a sensible place to begin. In religious parlance, it's called shomer einayim, guarding your eyes. But if that is the only solution, you are unlikely to succeed. First, because the problematic stimuli are so pervasive that there is just no way to avoid them completely. In the most unlikely moments, from the most unlikely corners, something perhaps completely innocent triggers a chain of associations, and before you know it, there you are, captivated by strange fire. Second, says Tanya, if you are triggerable, then you are not a tzaddik. And if you are not a tzaddik, then you have impurities of soul inherited from the primordial breaking of vessels, no blame. And if you have these impurities of soul, then they will activate, for that is how they instigate their tikkun. It is possible, even likely, says the Tanya, that one main purpose of your life is to clean out these impurities, either by A, taking responsibility for finding the most spiritually productive way to manage them, or B, enduring the purgating consequences that follow from indulging them. And so, says Tanya, if managing these impurities and the impulses they trigger is part of our life purpose, then we won't be able to solve their problem by avoidance alone. We can and should steer clear of things that are designed to awaken strange fire, that's for sure. And that brings us to our third point. If avoidance is our only strategy, we will become prisoners to the very impurity we are trying to avoid. For example, we may start off averting our glance from immodest stimuli, but discover that lustful thoughts still arise. And so, instead of dealing with that internally, we avoid encounters with all members of the opposite sex, family or not, child, adult, yet still thoughts arise. And so we avoid pictures of even modestly dressed women in newspapers, advertisements, or family photos, and still thoughts arise. And so we avoid even the mention of women's names, and even still thoughts arise. And so we avoid studying Kabbalah because it uses the metaphor of union to describe the unfolding of worlds, and still thoughts arise. And so we avoid studying the Mishnah and Talmudic tractates that deal with women, and still thoughts arise. Clearly, the strategy has failed. Instead of eliminating wayward thoughts, it has heightened sensitivities so that now even neutral stimuli trigger strange fire. Now, even more time goes into devising even more stringent avoidance tactics. Freedom of movement is severely curtailed, for temptations lurk at every turn. And then, of course, the blame gets projected onto the source of the trigger, which in this case is the visibility of even modestly dressed women. We impose fences upon fences of restrictions that force others to bear the brunt of our weakness. The strategy of avoidance flips into an avoidance of responsibility for our own inner life. In the end, if we are constantly thinking about how to avoid the temptation, then we are constantly thinking about the temptation, which means we are constantly thinking about the very thing we are seeking to avoid. We end up living in a jail cell of our own making, ruled by the very thing we are trying to master. Why does this happen? Because the real source of wayward thoughts, says Tanya, is inside, from the impurities of soul inherited from primordial times, as discussed in Lesson 5 of this series. The trigger just reminds us that we are not tzaddikim, which means wayward thoughts will inevitably arise, and we must learn to contain, dissolve, or sublimate them. This is called inner work, and it's also called taking responsibility for our inner life. And in the language of Tanya, it is the service of Beinonim. The Tanya is clear. Directing your efforts toward eliminating wayward thoughts, expecting them to never arise, that goal, says the Tanya, will not succeed. It is even dangerous, for it keeps you distracted from the real work at hand, where you really can make a difference, the work of mastering your inner life by nipping these impulses in the bud. Meditation of one sort or another must be part of the tool set if we are to have any hope of success. This particular technique is called withdrawal of the senses and will be discussed at length in the next lesson. Withdrawal of the senses happens inside the psyche. There is no physical blocking of the eyes, ears, nose, etc. from provocative stimuli. In summary, the term strange fire describes the predicament of taking pleasure from something that violates one's own moral code. Everyone grapples with this challenge in one form or another. The first strategy employed is usually avoidance, to steer clear of the illicit stimuli. That is a good place to begin, but it will not suffice. Avoidance must be augmented with an equal, perhaps even greater measure of inner work, i.e., meditation. The particular technique of meditation that addresses strange fire is called withdrawal of the senses and will be the focus of the next lesson.